Hi, I'm Gloria Parisi, the wife of Louis Parisi, whom you will be interviewing today, and we hope that this will be an enjoyable documentary for the future.
And I'm Lou Parisi, the lucky spouse of Mrs. Parisi, I can call her that, and we're happy to be sitting here and sharing with you the conversation that I hope will be of interest to those that may suffer through viewing it, yes.
I was quite young, not quite 16, and every night my mother would send me to the Tubes, the subway station on Grove Street. At 9 o'clock, I had to get the newspaper for her every night. In the process of walking to get the newspaper, some gentleman came barreling around the corner, and when he did, he would plop right into me. Of course, I was a little annoyed. I said, "Why don't you watch where you're walking?" And he said, "Oh, I'm very, very sorry." He said, "I'm very sorry. Are you hurt? Are you all right?" I said, "Oh, I'm just fine." You know, "Oh, where are you going?" "I'm going to get a newspaper." "Oh," I said, "Well, may I walk you?" Well, I looked at him and, "Okay." He said, "Well, I'm going to get one too." So we went to the newspaper. Well, as far as we got to the newspaper, he said, "Can I take you for an ice cream soda?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Okay, we can go for an ice cream soda." Well, we went for an ice cream soda, come home, and I thought my mother was going to kill me. Where did I go for the newspaper? She thought I was printing it.
I enjoyed the ice cream soda. I enjoyed reading the paper, but most of all, it brought me 68 years of further enjoyment and having the pleasure of winning not only our company with her, but also winning the happiness of 68 years that I'm now enjoying, as you can see.
Because I wasn't quite out of school yet. I wasn't out of high school yet.
Yes.
You know. So I was a teenage bride.
And I had just returned discharge.
And he just came back from service.
Yes.
On walking Grove Street was a very a busy street. It had all kinds of little stores. The city hall was nearby, as I say, the subway station. And I recall walking across the street, and in an empty lot was this young Marine. And there was a little boy with him. And there the two of them were throwing ball, throwing catch. And I stood there and I watched them for a minute, and I said, "Oh my goodness, this looked like something you see in a picture on a Reader's Digest cover or something, or Look magazine or something." And it was very stirring to me to see this young Marine, who probably was just coming home, playing ball with a little boy in a lot, never knowing it was him.
And really, it was almost an embarrassment to be upright and to be a young man without a uniform. And really, there was a question of not having any friends to really associate with, and just except the older men and some of those that were 4F. And I felt very sensitive in being able-bodied and not being in the service. And in my end of my third year at St. Peter's Prep, I was a student at the Prep, just a private high school just down the block. And the principal came to me and he said, "You know, you've got fairly good marks. St. Peter's College has lost most of its young men and they want to stay open." He didn't tell me that, but I surmised that after we can get you out of here and get you into St. Peter's College at the end of junior year. You can, instead of going to senior year, you can go there and at the end of this June and become a college student before you went to the service. And I thought that I was being complimented from what the principal had seen, which I did not see, an intelligence that would enable me to miss a year of high school. And I thought it was a good idea, and I did. I was going to, in that September, I went to St. Peter's College for my senior year of high school, and still longing to put on a uniform at 17, so I joined the New Jersey State Guard. After the National Guard was federalized, the state set up a home guard, and called the State Guard, so it gave me the chance of putting on a uniform and not being embarrassed, and also going to the armory just every Tuesday night, taking the bus to go to the armory, train for a couple of hours and have the feeling that you're serving the military. And while I was in college, there was an accelerated program. They had a V5 program for naval aviation, and I wanted to be a Navy flyer, so that I took the exam for the V5 program, passed the exam, and went for my physical in New York, and unfortunately failed the physical. And I just had a weakness in the left eye, so I decided I would join the Marine Corps. At 17, you needed parents' permission to enter the service, and I didn't think my parents would be that excited to get me out of the house, although their treatment of me at times didn't made me to think otherwise, that they'd be happy, but evidently they would not have been. So I waited, and I went to the draft board, said, like, well, you call me as soon as I'm 18. And that June, of course, I was called to the draft board, and they had various enlistments for the Navy and the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps. My first cousin joined the Marine Corps prior to World War II and served at Korea, and he was my hero. Nothing made me prouder than to walk with him when he was on leave in his blues and walk down the street. So this is what I wanted to be, and therefore I joined the Marine Corps, and that began what certainly was for me a very short but vivid and very proud moment of my life. Probably the strongest memory of my mother was when I left for boot camp. Well, just the embrace, and I could feel, and that I was just 18 years old, but I could feel when I turned around. Of course, it was an exciting time for me, but I had the good sense to feel her sense of anxiety and loss. But like any mother, of course, she expressed for me in that one embrace, she expressed for me a mother's emotion that I will always appreciate. And Dave and I can say this, that we, perhaps as men, can never fully appreciate the depths of a mother's and a wife's and a woman's dedication and feelings for those that she loves. I went into the Marine Corps. I knew it was a challenge, and really the fact that I was able to survive, of course, made me very, very proud. And that finally, after 12 or 13 weeks, to march the battalion, of course, across the parade ground was for me certainly a very proud moment. And as you know, Dave, and anyone that's been in the service, it's a testing of not only your physical strength, but emotionally. And I remember one night, emotionally, I thought I had enough. I was feverish, wouldn't dare tell my drill sergeant I wanted to go to sick bay, and just suffered through the sweat and just cried myself to sleep. What have I done, in joining the Corps? But as it ended out, it was the proudest moment for me, and I will never have that satisfaction of feeling that I've done something worthwhile, other than taking Gloria for her own boot camp that she suffered through very nobly, and still smiling over the experience. So, but finishing boot camp, a memorable experience, and one that would have serious consequences for a long time. The night before we knew we were going to leave and going to leave boot camp, we had the parade and so on. And that night we had to get our equipment, get everything ready, and therefore, rather than taking down the cots, all of the men, without exception, the entire battalion took down their cots, got their packs ready, and made their way to sleep in various common areas around the camp. I could not find a floor big enough to accommodate my body, and had to move maybe a quarter of a mile, a half mile from to find a common station, the USO, or even a lavatory that I could flop down, and my friends had already picked a spot. So I was rather removed from the staging area for the train, and I didn't hear the reveille at 4 or 5 in the morning. And when I opened my eyes, I could feel the sunbeams on my face. I knew that was not going to be a good sign. I quickly picked up my rifle and my pack and ran, and I mean ran the quarter of a mile to the staging area. And as I got close enough, I saw 1,500 men standing at ease, the train over there tooting the horn, the smoke coming out of the coal, from the coal boilers. And I knew it wasn't while they all seemed pleased to see me, Major Mo, I could see from my face a quarter of a mile away, was not happy. And of course, he got into position. He said a few words that I won't repeat, and I fell in line. But on that train going to San Diego, I had mess duty. We got to San Diego, and all of my friends got leave to go to San Diego for the weekend leave. I had guard duty, base duty on the camp. 2 days before the transport left, they put me in a Jeep and took me down to the ship and put me down in the kitchen, and I had mess duty for the 30 days to go to the South Pacific to an island called Pavuvu or Benica, I forget. And we got there at January the 2nd, as I remember. But I thought it was rather cruel and unusual punishment, even for the Corps, to deny me liberty before going overseas. But it was discipline. I should have known better. But it's a remarkable achievement for, I think, very few people. And happily, the war was not delayed to any great extent as far as I could determine. But it was a loss. I wish I had been there, because some of the friends, Joe Orlando, for example, I would have enjoyed seeing that extra time with him. So many of them were killed, and it would have been nice to be with them. But the train ride, of course, was interesting for me. Obviously, the longest train ride I'd ever been in. And we had double bunks, of course, where you could sleep. Did we have bunks? I don't even remember it, just right in the seats. But no, I think they were bunks. I think they did have sleepers, 2 or 3 deep in the train. And going through Texas during, I'd not, as I may have heard, I'd never been surely never more than 100 miles from Jersey City until I got into the service. So that ride going across country was really, for me, a great adventure. But 3 days, 2.5 to 3 days, just going through Texas from one. Just the excitement of being on the train, looking out the window. There's not much you could do. There's no way to exercise, and just looking at the landscape, much of which I'd never seen before, obviously. In downtown Jersey City, seeing a tree was almost like going into a national park, for us. So it was exciting. There were 4 of them especially: Orlando, Paget, Parisi, Peterson. How well I remember, because we were in the fire team, and we were there from the first day of boot camp until Okinawa, yes. But we finally got to San Diego, spent a day or 2, and then we had leave for 1 weekend, which I did not have, and then went aboard ship. And I think you had ever heard that tape, of course, on that voyage across from San Diego to the South Pacific, in which I was denied, not only suffer through not having leave, but suffer through a loss of a Christmas, so that the Marine Corps and the government owes me a great deal to make up for, yes. We left in about the 10th or 12th of December of '44, because on the 25th we were passing the international date line, and it took us about 3 weeks to get to the South Pacific, an island of Pavuvu. I think we landed first, and it got there at night. It was raining, and I remember finally dumped us into some tents that so we could sleep for that night. Below deck, they had the canvas bunks, 4 or 5 feet high, and obviously not comfortable at all. But during the daytime, you just sit on the deck and enjoy the sun and do a little exercise if you can. But it took us about 3 weeks to get to the South Pacific. From maybe the 10th or 12th of December, and I remember January the 2nd when we finally landed. This was during the time in Europe. I remember where Paris had been taken, and in the Pacific, I guess we were, and on the boat, of course. Well, that was going to Okinawa too. Just before the Iwo Jima campaign, and the First Marine has just been pulled out of Peleliu. That was their last campaign in Peleliu, and another island, very costly, and most people don't even know of Peleliu, but like Tarawa, you know, they were just small islands, but terrific losses. And the Marine, we were the 27th Replacement Battalion for the 1st Marine Division, so we had not been assigned yet to any particular unit, and presumably, as we found out later, we were with them, and we planned to follow them on the landing day, feeling that the casualties would be so high they'd need us for that first day. But as it happened, we were kept aboard ship for that second day. Didn't land, actually. Had no need for us until D-Day +1, yes. I got up at dawn, saw the sun coming in, and I'm seeing coconuts, surrounded by coconut trees, and I wanted to explore myself. My only contact with the jungles was the Johnny Weissmuller films and I went out. I didn't take my rifle would have been useless because we had no ammunition for it, so I went out to scout and just looking around, amazed, hearing these strange birds and seeing the palm trees, walking down this road. Now, Jersey City is a polyglot community, you know, all kinds. But the sight that I saw coming down the road just had me appalled. I see these two huge figures coming back, no shoes on their feet, a burlap bag around their waist, bones through their nose, and I'm saying, my God, are they allies or are they part of the enemy force? And machetes in their hands and walking down, and obviously aggressively used to the landscape and in control. And I said, I can't turn around and run. I've got to, my pace obviously slackened somewhat. And I said, who are they, what are they, and how are they going to greet me? I'm alone, I don't have any. So I'm walking by, and when one of them opens the mouth and says, "Good morning, Joe," and I realized they must have been allies or somewhat, and they were friendly people, but they were from Malaita, and I found out later that they were just part of the mosquito control on the island to take care with their DEET, whatever insecticide they had. But it made me realize, now remember, I've been very naive, even more so. I'm still naive in many ways, but more so than knew nothing about the world at large. And I had no appreciation of different cultures. And I found out later they were from Malaita. They were workforce. We imported these men to help with the mosquito control for malaria, so that prevent malaria from the island. And then I got it. They knew it was an English possession and mostly plantation. Their productivity just in coconut plant export and so on. And they worked there, and I guess they were paid by either our government or the British, and just to control things. But they had, some of them had their homes in trees, and family men, obviously, but and you'd pay them a few cents, and they'd climb up, you know, with just put some ropes around their feet and just shimmy up that 30, 40-foot high palm tree and cut their coconut all around, you know. They come with a big husk on them. I don't know when they're already shelled, you know, but they come with a outer husk of some kind, and with the machete they just chop it off and break into the shell of the coconut, and they'd come down, climb up that tree, and drop a fresh coconut for you if you wanted it. As a private in the United States Marine Corps, basic, you know, you had a place to sleep, you had food, most of the food, and I remember sometimes being on a work detail, going into the warehouse and unpacking cereals and in sacks, in 50 or 75-pound sacks, moving them from one part to the other, and then opening them and using a sifter to sift out the edible parts from the bugs that infested them. And so rather simple, but you were able to survive. And really, the human body doesn't need that much to survive. When I think Okinawa, you know, just on rations for days, and one day just getting fresh bread, and just how delicious that, just a slab of white bread, no less, not even Italian semolina bread, just white bread. And yes, I don't think I've got two pictures of myself in the service. You know, you just didn't have a camera, and didn't have any communication. You wrote, and I wrote rather regularly to Mom and to your grandmother, yes, and my mother. But that was the only contact to write, and there was no other telephone or audible communication. And you were lucky to get some paper, and if you were in Okinawa, for example, sometimes we'd get some paper from the Red Cross. You can get off a letter, and in those days we didn't have to put a stamp on said pick up the mail and eventually get the letter out to you. Get home. And of course, the getting letters from home, that was something that people who have not had that experience as you must have felt, getting that letter from home and to read the print of someone that you loved back home, and it meant so very much, yes. When we left Pavuvu, I guess in the middle of February, 10th or 11th of February, we were aboard ship from Pavuvu to join up with the entire battalion was aboard an attack transport. We made a practice landing in Guadalcanal on the way to Ulithi. That was one of the staging areas in the Pacific. And this was the 10th or 11th of February. While aboard ship, of course, you know, on the 19th of February was the invasion of Iwo Jima, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions. And of course, when we heard of the costly loss of life just on the beaches, of course. We didn't know where we were going at the time, and even Iwo Jima was a new name. We wasn't even aware of the Bonin Islands, where that was, but it gave us some indication of just what we would be facing wherever it was. We finally got, this is February the 10th, we finally get to Ulithi in the Central Pacific to meet up with other units that were joining us. We actually were joined by your grandfather's unit, the 77th. We had 4 Army divisions and 3 Marine divisions. And we finally left Ulithi in about April the 1st, I guess. We were February, March. No, March 1st, of course. And it took us 30 days to get to Okinawa, but of course with the entire convoys moving, leaving Ulithi and going across and seeing the massive 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 ships. Of course you couldn't, your eye could not encompass all of them. And you really thought to yourself, here's a 150-pound Marine and surrounded by all of this power. You say, my Lord, how could anyone oppose the strength that we were able to mass at one time? And an interesting thing for me, aboard our attack transport was Ernie Pyle. He came aboard just about a week before they shuttled him over from one of the other ships, but he spent a week aboard our attack transport, and he was killed with your father as he finally left the 1st Marine Division and went to join the 77th and went to Ioshima. It was a smaller island off Okinawa. And on the 14th of April, he was killed by machine gun fire, yes. The tanks with the flamethrowers, of course, and not only the hand-packed, where the men with the flamethrowers would just shoulder them, and it was a job that I didn't want, but obviously a new technology and one of the horrors of the campaign. And then they brought up these jeeps that had these canisters, you know, maybe rows of 24 of them. And they were shells. I don't know how they were discharged, but they would just fire these 24. They'd be on packed on jeeps or military trucks and just fire one after the other. And then to see, for example, as you must have seen too, just when the planes went over, the kamikaze came over, and the ships, the destroyers, the cruisers, and even the Liberty ships with their anti-aircraft guns, and the sky, always amazed. The sky, you see, there's not a square inch of the sky that's free of exploding shells in the planes, simply so many of them finding their way through that shell fire. But seeing the extent of the weapons and even the artillery, the heavier ships, the cruisers, and those shells that would be screaming over and dig a hole, when they went down, dig a hole 20, 30 feet deep, and the power of those shells. But the flamethrowers, to see the body worked over by the flamethrower was for me, and the smell, perhaps the most graphic. And of course, when you saw when they get to the caves, and of course in Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and much of the islands there, most of the defenses were under the underground caves, and trying to get them out with usually with the flamethrower and gas bombs, they'd come running out. And of course, on the island, one Sunday there, they had a chapel, oiled cans with palm leaves and so on, and I thought I'd go to the chapel instead of the military chapel. There are some Marines in there before me, and these black men, paint on their faces, bones through their nose and the back. And I think that some of my religious leanings were shaped by that one experience. And I thought when the chaplain offered communion, I went up, and the men in the back, the natives, the 10 or 15 that were standing in the back, came up for communion. And I'm proud to say that at 18 years old, I had the good sense to myself, and I remember saying, Parisi, you've got to remember this experience. You see those poor men coming down, they're amazed at our electric lights, and our technology and their simplicity of their life, but their family men, their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, and perhaps, and there's no doubt that most of them, if not all of them, are better Christians probably than you are. And I thought, despite, you think you're pretty smart, you had a year of college and so on. And I suppose I did think I knew something about life and about the world at large. But I said, really, compared to these, you'll never be the kind of men that you see wait for you to go up to communion and then follow you. So that I think, and I really think that taught me a humility and an appreciation of my own unworthiness that I might not have felt. The friendship, the closeness, you see, Joe Orlando, Jack, Don Peterson, and the others, the friendships that are cemented so deeply in just a short time. It doesn't take long for you to develop that closeness to those that are serving under similar conditions. And it's that support and I guess a certain amount of pride that you don't want to show any fear or courage, not for yourself, but for their sake. And so they make you strong. So that I was happy that even after the service, I had maintained this relationship with Jack Paget. And as a matter of fact, when he died, he buried in Arlington. Gloria and I went to Washington. Of course, he was reinterred. He was a professor. He became a professor in a college, a professor of philosophy. And we maintained a relationship over the years after the service too. And we had a very moving ceremony. I don't know whether you ever seen one in Washington, but they had a service for him, and beautifully done with this. And we were happy to be there. As a matter of fact, I've got to call Kitty, his wife, because it was our birthday yesterday. We were born on the same day, and So therefore it made a special tie of relationship for us. If it comes without cost, there's no way to fully appreciate it. And I think that was something that our generation, that Laura Bonner and I, for example, we appreciated the cost of the safety of our government and the safety of our country and the sufferings, of course. And we knew firsthand that they weren't just names on a wall or just memorials. They were people we knew and we loved, and we understand the cost. Therefore, we appreciate the price. But unless you suffer, unless something costs you something, you place little value, and the value is determined by what it costs you to achieve that, to get that. And for those that are living in America today, if their families have not made a sacrifice for the liberties they enjoy, unless they are strong-willed and really are deeply appreciative of what has been given to us, it doesn't cost too much. And today, Dave, as you know, only 1% of American families have any direct contact with those that are serving. So therefore, 99% of Americans, unless they deliberately make a determination to do so, have little or no appreciation of these sacrifices made by the million of men that are still in service and their families. And even so, and I think really that the families left behind at any time when men and women have to leave, the families left behind, I think, bear a similar, if not a greater sacrifice and loss, and suffer as much than the men themselves. And I'm sure that even when I was Okinawa, as difficult as the times may have been, perhaps my mother and father and my sisters too may have felt even a greater anxiety than and perhaps even physically. And there were days I had some pretty good days too. And therefore the amount of sacrifice, the amount of loss that you feel, of course, strengthens your love of country. And I often think, I give many talks about our past history, and I think of the courage of the colonists. We can't appreciate the risks they took to take on Britain, the most powerful army in the world, and these militia, farmers, ordinary citizens with their outdated guns and no organization, and really the challenge, the Great Britain. Who would have thought it? And then 8 years, and they finally, and really it wasn't Washington just an expert in retreat and just selecting his place where he would meet them. And yet for 8 years, men without shoes, without food, without pay, without money, without any central government really to sustain them, and beat and forced to surrender at Yorktown. In the history of really our history, if people can only appreciate what we owe these colonists and people in Philadelphia, as your no city in America has that reputation, has sacrificed so much and has given so much of our history to the men that lived in Philadelphia, those colonists that sat down, and those terrible, and really pledged their lives and their sacred honor, and realized the risk not only to themselves but to their families. So it's one thing to say, like, I don't mind giving up my life, but you realize, hey, you're giving up the lives of your families, your loved ones, your wife, your children. That was, we will never have that quality of love of even a country that was not yet born, but the love of the values that country would represent. So that really, if we could appreciate the heroism of these people, would make us stronger and undergoing the challenges and the despair that you must feel, and all of you, that the disunity in our country today, the lack of neighborliness, the immorality, the culture that we have passed down to our children. We say, gee, this is not the America that was envisioned in 1776, and the environment that you people see in the buildings and the history of Philadelphia and the environs. Yes.
Document.
When you read that, you know, you say, how is it possible? That language of the colonists, and even if you look at the writings of those colonists, you know, the spontaneous Adams and Jefferson and Franklin, you know, the intelligence, and what was Adams? What was his wife? John Adams. What was her first name?
Abigail.
Was it Abigail? Well, when you read her letters, and you know, these are spontaneous, not something that I would have to sit down and for 2 hours to get one sentence that makes sense. Spontaneous, even Abraham Lincoln. You know, you read his letters and you say, my God, what a gift. What a mind that can conjure up, you know, those thoughts just a second, just flow so smoothly. What a gift. And we don't appreciate, you know, their talent and the sacrifice that they have made. And if we did, would have the American, our leadership and our citizens that would really make us the leaders of the world. And I often think, Dave, as you must, if we could channel all of the energy that we devote, you know, for weaponry and for political purposes, if we could channel all of the energy and the talents and the resources to make us better neighbors and better human beings, it will be a world that would be so much different. So much different. And as a matter of fact, if I have this opportunity to the public, I was going to give write a talk on borrowing Dickens' word, it is the best of times, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think that in many ways, technologically, these certainly are the best of times in our medicine, technology. And I think when my grandchild comes over here, takes out a smartphone and has in her hands, unbelievably, the wisdom of 4,000 years of world history, and can pick out in just seconds any bit of information, any fact that the world has, it's taken 4,000 years to accumulate, amass this, and she can do this in seconds. And I can't even work my dumb phone and get it to respond to a simple command like calling someone. So really it's the best of times, and yet it's the worst of times, because never in our history have we able to unleash on one another the savagery and the brutality, you know, inflicting on other human beings. And so I think if I ever write again, I'll borrow Dickens. It really is the best of times, and yet in many ways the worst of times that we're living in. And this is the legacy we're going to pass down to our generations, and my grandchildren, and my grandnieces as well, yes. I was on a hospital ship evacuated from Okinawa, and got to Guam, spent a couple of months at Guam, then flown to Hawaii, spent some time there, Oakland, spent some time there, and then finally in a hospital in Long Island, I forget the name, and finally discharged at Bainbridge, Maryland, yes. To be honest with you, Dave, I'm embarrassed sometimes when people offer some regret or sympathy, because I did not lose my eyesight. I was able-bodied. I was able to marry the belle of downtown Jersey City, and I mean that sincerely. And I was able to raise a family and supported them for the most part with, you know, teaching 42 years and teaching, so that I'm somewhat embarrassed when I can sense, and even the guys in our post sometimes, you know, they treat me with such gingerly sometimes, and it really just, and these are guys that spent 20, 30, 40 years and did military service and saw action that far is superior than anything I might or could have done. And I know they do this out of kindness, but I'm embarrassed by it, and simply because, Dave, unlike you and the others, they don't appreciate the real sacrifices that many of our brethren have made. And if they had, then they would give their sympathy and their gratitude and expressions of compliments that they do so generously, too generously sometimes, and where they truly belong. Well, I want to thank you for coming here. I hope you find some use to this tape and appreciate what the greatest generation has done for our country, and hope that their example can be passed on so that we can make this a better country for ourselves and those generations that follow us. Yes.